All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, James Keenan. I'm hopefully saying that right. It seems pretty cut and dry. James, we have you there with us?
Hi, Chauncey. Hi, Kara. How are you?
Not bad. Good. You just happen to have like one of my favorite. It's not even one of. It is my favorite topic. I am just sort of like enamored with what could possibly have been in the past, just even beyond some of the mysteries, just what we don't know because it degraded away, that there's so many tens of thousands of years of stuff that could be there. And plus, I was definitely influenced by J.R.R. Tolkien, this great Ralph Bakshi film called Fire and Ice. There's lots of stuff that definitely inspired me when I was younger. But okay, so why don't you give us a rundown of what we're really talking about here? Something so that our audience can really sort of understand what we mean when we say ancient anomalies pointing to past worldwide catastrophic events.
Well, sure. So in the past, obviously, what we have in our history books is nothing compared to what has gone on. And if you look around, you can clearly, you can see in ancient artifacts, buildings, monumental structures, oral traditions, forms of writing, which my specialty is rock art on paper, other forms and religious texts and other forms of recording data, that there's these hints or these clues that what we know isn't the full story. And a lot of anomalies that pop up are always written off by anthropologists and archaeologists because it doesn't fit into their timeline or to, what we've been hearing since the mid-1800s. And if you attempt to change that or, try to introduce a new paradigm, think outside of the box, they get all ticked off with you. So then you end up having to go back and you research further and you find these ones and twos when it comes to scientists, geologists. You'll find one or two archaeologists. You'll find physicists that break away from their group and start or begin to notice these anomalies, these things that deviate from what is standard or normal or expected, and they start to clue in on what really most likely occurred. And we have such a small amount of history that's known to us, and they continue to try to push the matter that it started 6,500 years ago with writing and with ancient Sumeria, when, obviously from what it sounds like, Chauncey, you and I know it goes way, way further back. Unfortunately, these past civilizations and these past cultures were lost, and most of it was due to these massive worldwide catastrophes that took place. And the way that you see that is the hidden history, the anomalies are the same throughout the world.
All right. Hey, I got a question here before we move on to the good stuff. When we're talking about civilization and when civilization started, a lot of people will cite the Bible. They'll cite Sumeria, but where do we consider civilization starting? There's like a Göbekli Tepe that's like 9,000 years ago. There's and these numbers might be totally wrong, but there's some like Siberian proof of agriculture and some in China of making wine. When do we consider civilization as actually having taken place? Are we just talking a city, or what really defines that?
Well, and you brought it up too, Göbekli Tepe seems to be now what they're willing to go back as far as it was probably about 12,000 years ago. And what defines it is written language Suddenly we've gone from small little pockets of having turned into Homo sapiens sapien to agriculture being present. Once you have the agriculture, you have all that subsistent farming, then culture is able to branch out. So then you start specializing in things like blacksmithing, different other types of arts and crafts. And at that point, then, you bring into a barter system, you start bringing on economics, and then you get religion in order to control the masses.
So so why are people so willing to just let go of the idea that even as early as 25,000 years ago, that somebody built a wooden city, kept records on wood or paper, and that all got wiped away and eroded? Why are people so quick to say, hey, this didn't happen?
I think a lot of it comes to religion. I think religious beliefs play a factor when it comes to that. And also the fact that, when you have these people that carry a doctorate's degree telling the masses, hey, this is what happened, and you're constantly told they're the expert, this is what happened, you start to believe, or, as you and I know, you start to conform with that belief.
So how should we file these anomalies? I've read quite a few of these, which I'd like to cover with you in the next segments. But I read Forbidden Archaeology and stuff like that, and there was a big complaint about these anomalies being discarded. But how should we file them so that they're taken seriously? Because, of course, scientists have to come up with what they think based off of statistical likelihood and such like that. But we also don't want to lose track of these anomalies.
Right, and like you said, they end up getting discarded or put away into a drawer on purpose. And when you think about it, how many of these anomalies does it take before you finally start realizing, wait a minute, maybe it's not the storyline that we have that's right. Maybe we need to open up our minds and start looking, at what it's trying to show us. And you've got to wonder, how many of these anomalies does it, take, or how many of these interesting artifacts that we're finding is it going to take until you get a larger degree of the anthropologists and archaeologists to say, hey, maybe we need to start investigating. Göbekli Tepe is a good start. It's pushed us back, thousands of years. And if you think about it, if they already were that advanced at that time, they're saying, hey, this was 12,000 years ago. Well, it had to have taken a lot longer to get to that point.
Right. And isn't 12,000 years just even by all conservative scientists? And when I say conservative for the audience, I don't mean political. I mean conservative, like mainstream science views. Isn't 12,000 quite beyond the last ice age? Isn't that well into a very drastically different looking world?
Well, it's in that younger Dryas phase. The world about 14,500 years ago started heating up, and things started changing, and then something happened, and that's kind of what I get into, that at that point a major catastrophe took place. And you see that at about 12,800 years ago, we all of a sudden dipped into this ice age again, and it got cold quickly at that time.
All right. Well, we're coming up on to break here. When we come back, I'm really looking forward to asking you about some of these anomalies and us having a conversation about what they possibly could have been that caused these to go on. All right, so you're listening to James Keenan here on Radio Wasteland. We're talking about ancient anomalies pointing to past worldwide catastrophic events. So, come on back. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, James Keenan. So, James, give us why don't we start off with an example um, of one of this that we can all kind of wrap our brains around. Can you huck us an example?
So,
Oh, it sounded like you cut out there, or did I cut out?
I think you cut out.
Okay, I was saying we're back here with James Keenan, and I'm asking you to give us an example of this ancient anomalies that we can all kind of wrap our brains around, especially so the listening audience can really sort of understand what we're talking about.
Sure. So, my specialty is petroglyphs, rock art, and if you go to one of 200 places around the world, you're going to find certain glyphs that are identical. And you kind of have to ask yourself, how is that possible? And then you have to start looking at the glyphs, and you have to start looking at the glyphs around it. You have to look at the age, because I'm looking for certain glyphs that are old. They need to be at that point or period where the catastrophes took place. So we're looking at about 6,500 years ago, 12,000 years ago. And these glyphs, what they're showing are plasma events that took place up in the sky. And our ancestors saw them, lived through the trauma, the events that took place because of it, and those that survived recorded it. And if they couldn't record it right away, it was passed down, in oral tradition until somebody did actually put it in as a petroglyph or a pictograph onto, something that lasts forever, which is rock.
Now, there's a lot of mythologies out there. There's a Greek mythology. There's blah blah blah. The Norse. You know better than I. What makes one? Is it consistency? Is it connection to other parts of the world? What makes one mythology sort of stand out as something that we're going to believe there's some fact in here, and other mythologies we say, this is just the mythology or story writing.
Well, and that's what's kind of interesting, Chauncey, because when you listen to the mythology, a lot of them are similar or identical. Like you look at the Sumerians, and they had a very similar story as Noah and Noah's flood.
Yeah, the Epic of Gilgamesh has always been the one that stood out to me as like hey, something's going on here.
Right.
Yeah.
And you look at you can put ancient Olmec, ancient Maya, and compare it to on the other side of the world, and the stories are very similar. There's catastrophic events. They start talking about entering the underworld and hell having taken place. Well, when you look at the rock art and the other things that go with it, you're looking at massive volcanic events that took place with magma coming up out of the ground, and it was a hell on earth. And, people are talking about entering into the underworld. Well, it's coming from an actual event that took place. Or, you're talking about a deluge, a worldwide event. All the Native Americans, or most of the Native Americans, have the same type of story as the Sumerians, as the Egyptians, as, those that were, the Norse, the pre-Norse, cultures. It's the same. There's minor discrepancies, and you have to remember that over time, oral traditions change. So when you take into, consideration thousands of years have passed, that's a lot of time for, stories to get mixed up, changed, differences of opinions and things of that nature to take effect.
Right. So really, just off the top of my head, I can only think of two, possible ways that we could have all been connected before and then scattered afterwards, and had these things, last for so long. One, of course, is, aliens, which we're seeing with Ancient Aliens. And then the other is, of course, that there are ancient civilizations that rose and fell that we just don't know about. What do you tend to? Well, I'm sure you don't like to come up with an answer too much, but I mean, is there a possibility that you're leaning towards?
Well, and when I lecture, you're going to actually get that from me as when you look at one of the things that I studied a lot on was allele theory, deoxyribonucleic acid RNA structures, and you've got to look around and you're like, how the hell are we the only species that evolved to where we are right now? There have been millions upon millions of species. For us to be it, there's no way, unless there was some type of genetic restructuring, recoding, and those alleles were restructured, the DNA was changed. But how we got to that, you're saying aliens or ancient civilizations, I don't have the answer, and I don't think anybody does. I tend to agree with you that, maybe those are intertwined and are one and the same.
Right.
And,
the other one being floated around here is time travel, that's...
what?
The 2 billion year old
foot. I'm more inclined to believe that we're talking about portals and interdimensional travel, because I personally think that is more realistic than long distance space travel, unless you're talking about artificial intelligence traveling through, and then there may be the ones that are restructuring, because you got to look at the history too. You look at all these, and these are the anomalies, these weird animals, like a unicorn that didn't make it, or you have these massive balls in Costa Rica that are huge, and archaeologists are telling you they're naturally made. Hell no, I've seen them. There's no way. They were created, and the size, it had to have been a larger human-like creature. Are we to be the only ones here? Absolutely not. People always, you got to think, the reptiles, the dinosaurs, they were here for hundreds of millions of years. How is it that maybe a part of them didn't gain this type of intelligence, this ability to think, and left or went elsewhere in the planet?
Or even, one thing that we even know for sure on the conservative mainstream side is that there were other competing hominids, that were competing at our same intelligence level on our way up. And, what could have happened there? I don't know.
Yeah.
So why, we only got about 2 minutes up until the break here. So is your real opinion that people are not open to this is purely scientific dynasties, like people building on the research of others, and they have careers and they don't want to be laughed out, and so that's why they hold on to it?
And that's exactly what I believe. They've been taught to believe this, and when I was going to UCSB and I was taking anthropology and archaeology, if I tried to bring up any other type of opinion other than what the professor was told, that he was told by his professor, and yada yada, this went on and on, they cut you off right away, and they just say that's, it's ludicrous, it's impossible, stick to what we're telling you, we're the experts. But they've got to remember that social science is anthropology and archaeology, and it's completely subjective.
Right. Yeah, because I don't know. But, I mean, there is some hope there. There was a shift here recently with scientists. It seemed for years saying absolutely no to aliens, to now all of a sudden you see these TV scientists and they're asked and they say absolutely there's probably something out there. So they may not be on board with abduction or current visitations, but things are changing. Maybe people are getting a little looser. All right, we're coming up on break here with James Keenan. We're talking about ancient anomalies pointing to past worldwide catastrophic events. Come on back. You're listening to Radio Wasteland with Chauncey and Kara. Find all our shows and archives by visiting Radio Wasteland at radiowasteland.us. All right, welcome back to Radio Wasteland and our guest, James Keenan. So I guess this begs the question, and this is the big question. It seems like mainstream science pushes us back about 2,000 years every once in a while, especially here in North America for when it was occupied. How far back are we thinking human civilization actually goes?
Oh, gosh, if you look at what they found in Sumeria with the King's tablets, it goes back 400,000 years.
So this tends to clash, because this is where the real question comes in, because, I kind of knew this was going to be the answer. So I'm kind of setting up our next question, and that is, how do we just
reconcile
the battle with the evolutionary science to the factoids that are going back further?
That's a difficult question to answer, because you have two different factions. You have people like myself, like you, it sounds like, that obviously believe that there were other humanoid type people that lived here, that our history was lost, goes back a long distance, and then you have a lot of those people, in universities, the scholars that are sticking to a very conservative timeline. And if we stick to them going back 2,000 years every decade or 2 decades, it's going to take a long time, to get to where I believe we really started from, or at least where we're able to somewhat show some evidence that we existed, and we existed with greater abilities at some points than what we have right now, and I mean by technology. If you follow the catastrophes, you can, or at least I'm able to show us going back about 70,000 years with catastrophes that have caused us to lose, our technology and go back into another dark age, and then it took thousands of years to build it back. But I don't know what it's going to take, and I don't think it ever will get to the point where everybody will agree upon, hey, this is it, unless at some point maybe we find a different technology which allows us to slip back into the past, or, go through some type of portal that was created, and be able to get the actual answers. Otherwise, it's going to be, presenting evidence, and if they want to accept it, they can, and if not, they're not going to.
Right. Yeah, I realize, and I also realized that the question I asked, of course, was very open-ended. I did not expect you to have an answer, because it seems like our world, our country specifically, is just full of these different ideas that can't reconcile with one another. So you got an event coming up here talking about what we've been talking about, which is ancient anomalies pointing to past wide world catastrophic events. I haven't made it through that one yet. In Tempe, Arizona. I used to live in Tempe. Tell us about that.
I do. That'll be next month on August 17th with Phoenix MUFON.
So is this a presenting situation where you come up, or is this some part of a larger event?
No, I'll be presenting to MUFON. I'll be the guest speaker for the month of August.
I see. So this is like touring.
About a 2.5-hour lecture going into, into a lot greater detail, and actually presenting the evidence that I have, showing the petroglyphs, showing lost technology, and showing amazing places that, I just came back from Mexico on the West Coast from Chihuahuacan, and this is a civilization that is just now being discovered that was lost. You're talking about an 8 square mile area on the west coast of Mexico where they said there was never advanced cultures or civilizations, where we now have a 3,500 plus year old pyramid that is made out of a clay that has lasted this long without breaking up, and when they've tried to reproduce it, they haven't been able to do it so far.
Crazy. And I mean, that kind of harkens back to what we were just saying, where maybe we don't even need a new type of technology. Maybe eventually we'll just find those things. Maybe the technology from before actually made something that will hold an artifact to the point where it's undeniable as to how old it is. You know, maybe we'll get there. Let's keep digging.
Yeah, maybe we will.
Literally keep digging.
Yeah, I always wonder if we're reverse, back engineering old technology.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I don't want to run out before talking about another book that you have here. But what's your take on the government maybe knowing more about our history? Do you think they have a stake in this, or do you think they're just kind of letting the scientific community do it?
Absolutely. I'm. I've talked to a couple people, and from a lot of things that I see, I think they come across things. I think a lot of what was found in World War II came along with those scientists that they brought over, in Operation Paperclip.
Right.
Things to that nature, they are not going to, discuss. They've obviously found things that I'm sure have added to the current technology. There was better, bigger, better thousands of years ago compared to what there is today.
All right. And before you go, I wanted to talk about this. Andrea told me about this just this afternoon before we were coming on here. She said that you wrote a children's book called The UFO and an Alien. This is something I've kind of entertained doing. What's this book all about?
Yeah, it's called The UFO and an Alien. And, I've been going to, things like the UFO Congress or MUFON, and you look around and there are no children. There rarely is anybody under the age of 25 there. And I was like, I want to make sure that the next generations are set up to carry on, what's going on now. We're losing some great people as they age, and there doesn't seem to be as much interest with the kids. So I wanted to, along with teaching them, certain morals and values, in the book, also introduce them to ufology and introduce them to, other paranormal type possibilities in the world. And I saw a lack of this, and so I decided, what better way than to start introducing a series of books that does this through what I think is a pretty decent story, and, also kind of plants that seed with them.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great idea, and it sounds like a fun idea, and I would totally buy one, but I got to tell you, I am so happy that my youngest is 18, and I am not going back. There are no more kids for this. I am done. All right.
I hear you. Mine turned 18, too.
Yeah. Oh, man. What a relief. All right. So if you could give our audience a place where they can find out more about you, seeing how we're at the end of the show here.
Yeah, sure. So I have an author page on Amazon under James Keenan, the only one. And also I have my Facebook, James Keenan, or you can go to Dark Shadows and Catastrophes, which is the name of my first fictional novel. And you can find me at one of those three places.
All right. We'll be sure to share that at radiowasteland.us and on Facebook and all those other things we're a part of. You've been listening to James Keenan here on Radio Wasteland, and we've been discussing ancient anomalies pointing to past worldwide catastrophic events. It only took an hour. All right. Thanks for coming on the show. You've been listening to Radio Wasteland.